I had a chance to sit down virtually with Tory, the founder and the CEO of Gray Company. She's a search engine journal contributor. She's a women in tech speaker. She is one of the voices, one of the contributors leading the way when it comes to AI driven discovery, when it comes to AI visibility, when it comes to tech, when it comes to SEO. If you're interested in any of these things, this is a video that is right up your alley for sure. You won't want to miss this one. Tory, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. Tory, what you've built with Gray is the exemplification of what many business owners and aspiring agency owners would like to accomplish. With that being said, how did your career take you from traditional SEO to a tech-focused agency?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's a lovely thing to say. A high bar. Hopefully I'm living up to those standards. So we definitely still do traditional, especially technical SEO, and that was our launching point. But I also love software, and I love product, and I love technology in general, and the complexities and the weird ways that software works, especially in conjunction with working with engineering teams. So I think the complexity, the way they go about solving problems, that stuff is just really interesting and exciting. And frankly, we're a small boutique consultancy, so I get to drive and kind of take on the projects in the direction we want to go in because we're small. We only have to take on so many projects, and that's just what I'm personally interested in, and we love it, so that's what we do. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I'm interested in the same, so I can definitely relate to you. So for agency owners who want to build credibility, build authority like you've done, what would you say would help them do that? Is it original research, case studies, or something else?
I mean, I don't think of it as an authority so much as I think of it as trust building trust in an authentic and real way for the long term and not just for the short term. So I also take my work and ownership over that work very, very seriously, sometimes too seriously. And I'd say I bring that attitude with me wherever I go. So when I do work with people, I think all those small touches when I'm working with clients, when I'm working with someone in the SEO community, I think those touches can build up to build a reputation over time, essentially. And I'd also say, while I don't quote unquote build in public, I am strongly for helping folks, especially disenfranchised folks, sort of grow up in SEO. And what I mean by that is nothing about immaturity so much as when I was coming up in my career, I found it really challenging to move from beginner to intermediate and intermediate to advanced. And so I think it's very important to pay it forward to other folks to do the same thing for them. And that means I'm out there sharing resources and sharing thoughts and doing mentorships and engaging with the community in meaningful ways that help solve that problem. So while I'm not building in public, I am working in public in that way. And some of that's, very public, and some of that's one-on-one in a mentorship. But, that's not why I do it. I don't do it to build authority. I don't do it I do it because it's right for me and I want to, but I think that's sort of a nice side effect that I did not anticipate, but sure is nice to have and benefit from, certainly.
And when dealing with clients, how do you educate them? Because I've noticed that a lot of times clients don't necessarily speak our language as SEOs, so they don't necessarily know what's going on. When you start talking about RAG bots and you start talking about JavaScript or no JavaScript on a website, et cetera, things like that. When you get into the weeds, how do you help them to speak our language? How do you educate them?
It's a good question. I start with asking questions. So I think when you don't know something in depth, this is something we all do, you ask the question that you know to ask. But through sort of running through these patterns of what clients ask and what people ask in Slack channels, other SEOs, there starts to be sort of a pattern of, okay, well, why are you asking for that? Sort of that Seven Sign Deck, like, what's the why? What's the why behind what you're asking? So I'm not going to assume that they 100% know what they mean. I'm going to attempt to ask probing questions that help me underline and understand their why, so I can try and answer what they're truly asking for, as opposed to necessarily the words that they are saying. And sometimes those are absolutely aligned, and that's a very quick conversation. And sometimes it ends up going much deeper, and then I end up answering a completely different question than I even realized. I think there's also a terminology question to your point about the RAG bots and this and that. So I try and straddle a line. Like, not gatekeeping is very, very important to me. So whether it's through analogies or, storytelling, I don't want to talk so fast and use so many big words that people aren't following me, which doesn't mean that doesn't happen. We're all learning and growing, and we're all in different places, and I can't guarantee that, but I do try and pay attention to body language. And am I losing them? Are they glossing over? Are they engaging and nodding along? Trying to, follow those things, and frankly, just sometimes check in. I do with certain clients, because sometimes you're talking to more than one stakeholder on a single call, and they have different education levels. And so I'm trying to talk to somebody that's an executive, and someone that's a developer, and someone that's a marketing manager, who all speak pretty fundamentally different languages at the same time. So I try and check in with all of them, and go back and explain things, and say, and just say, hey, am I explaining this well? Are you with me before we proceed? Because it's important to understand this point before we can get to this point. So it's a variety of things, but it mostly comes down to communication.
Okay, and you've described GEO as SEO plus. What would you say belongs in that plus? Can you expound on it? Expound on the multi-channel marketing aspect of what people are calling GEO or AEO?
Yeah, absolutely. So the plus is doing, I'd say, two primary things. I'd say there are, sure, tactical optimization differences for AI search bots and ability to be served in AI search GEO versus search. But you need to be careful with some of those things, because sometimes doing one hurts the other. But I find that those things are shades of gray different. And I also find, frankly, that a lot of what works in the geo world are SEO tactics from the 2010s, right? Like, they are old school and often spammy techniques is what's frankly working right now. So it feels like almost a rewind to keyword stuffing, frankly. And let's go get those links regardless of anything else. Now we call them citations, but maybe they're brand mentions, and those count too now. I just find them to be very, very similar. So I think it's like the tweak of the optimization that you have to pay very close attention to. And then it's also the multi-channel effort, because yes, at its base, geo is SEO. And if you have crappy SEO, you're not going to have great geo, but it also requires other channel disciplines outside of SEO, some of which we're used to coordinating with really, really closely, and some of which we aren't. So we have worked with content teams for a long time, and sometimes content is so tightly married to SEO that it is part of the SEO team, but sometimes I've worked on plenty of teams where content is a separate team. Also PR, we have digital PR that's a little bit in between. So those are sort of some of the more traditional channels that have not historically been SEO, but feel a lot more like SEO now. But there can be other channels, brand strategy, or let's say affiliate marketing. Affiliate marketing results in brand mentions and links. And therefore, how much do we think the AI bots are differentiating between a true brand link and an affiliate link? That's not a team we've traditionally worked with. And therefore, there's just a lot of different ways to impact the ecosystem and the way you optimize in geo. And not all of those are in the traditional SEO wheelhouse. So that's the multi-channel nature. So I think of it as SEO foundationally with some stuff on top, versus I want to provide a comparison here to agentic actions. So a type of bot from LLMs, but to me, agentic work is substantially different. These are brand new bots. They have different capabilities. We have different tools. We have different technical documentation and standards to live up to, whole new metrics and ways to measure and what the difference is there. So to me, agentic search, or whatever we want to call that, is a whole new discipline in a way that AI search or geo is not.
Wow. So there's two new disciplines, GEO, AEO, and then agentic search. So that's a lot of education that people are going to need. And with that being said, you spoke about the multi-channel marketing aspect. How does a brand know? Because obviously there's different niches and verticals. how does a brand know where specifically they should be marketing? I'm just piggybacking off of the multi-channel marketing aspect. So when it comes to the multi-channel marketing, how do I know? Should I be on Reddit? Should I be on LinkedIn? Should I be somewhere else? How do I determine?
I mean, the short answer is you can audit that. You can say, where am I trying to be seen? Who is seen instead of me? What are they engaging in? And where are the various LLM systems turning to? Are they basing that on review sites, on specific review sites, and which review sites are there? I might want to be listed there. How many citations do they have? How many brand mentions do they have? How many do we have relative to that? So pretty much the same thing we've been doing in the SEO world, and we can measure that, but executionally, it might just be a different team moving forward on rolling out. Strategically, we know what we need to do, and SEO can perhaps lead that initiative, but actually getting the work done may or may not be SEO.
Right. And Grey Dot has a responsible AI approach. Can you explain what that means and what it is, in your view, AI should be doing versus what the human should be doing, the human in the loop? And, what's the distinction there?
I mean, it's a complicated question because I feel like different people have different viewpoints on this, but I think there's no denying that AI has big environmental impacts, big ethical implications, big impacts on different disenfranchised communities. So I think we need to be thoughtful about how and where and why we deploy that, not to mention the human impact of, everyone in the AI world has been sort of excitedly beating the drum of, ooh, yay, we can fire everyone. Isn't that exciting? And I don't subscribe to that opinion. I don't think that that's a great path forward. I also think from my own work in AI and the work that I've seen from others putting out there in the world, it's not always very good. Sometimes it's very good. And to me, and how we use AI, we start with the human. So if we're going to pilot a new practice, say agentic auditing has been something that's been very top of mind for us for the past 2 months if we've been putting together our service offering around that. I think we can start with architecting what do we want to do and why? How are we different? What do we want to look into? And then I can use AI, say, as a sounding board to say, hey, poke holes in this. Where am I wrong? What have I missed? And then I can take those answers and I can understand and decide where I believe AI and where I don't, because some of those answers are incorrect. And I can provably go through, the sort of conversations you have when you're like, no, give me your citation. Where are you pulling that from? And then it turns out to not be the case, right? But me, as a person who's been doing this for a long time, I can sniff that out and I know which facts are not true, or I can dig into those details. So I can sort of make the little tweaks along the path of the optimization that mean that ultimately AI is here to speed up parts of the process that might otherwise, I don't want to get hung up on the wording of this and that and not really convey the meaning of what I'm saying. Can it help me tweak those words and not get hung up and then get to a better, higher quality product faster? But I don't want to put out the AI slop or the AI grenade. There's a whole new set of terminology coming out in this world to help us understand when AI is not working. And to me, this sort of working together is a way to take advantage of the technology in a human first way that feels inevitable. Frankly, like even if you have ethical considerations with it, which I do, it also feels like there's nothing you can do about it. You also have to keep up in this world, right? So that's how I work to balance it and still hire humans and still work with people and still put out quality work that I'm willing to put my name on.
Yeah, I think balance is very important with anything. I look at it almost like, and it may not be an apples to apples, but I look at it almost like when the internet first came out or when computers first became popular. I know that there were people who were saying, oh, computers, they're going to take over the world. The internet is going to destroy the world, but as you can see, the world has gone on, but there were ethical implications.
There was a big dot-com bust in the middle.
There are ethical implications now. Your team built a Chrome extension called the AI Difference Engine. Can you explain what that is and what its purpose is? From my understanding, its purpose is to show the difference between what a human views on a web page versus what an AI bot will view on a web page. So why is that important?
So I actually have two extensions. We have Rendering Difference Engine and we have the AI Difference Engine. Rendering it Difference Engine is really geared for SEO practitioners to be QAing to understand rendering differences for Google, right? Google does render, but
And
that
what is
doesn't mean
rendering?
everything.
For those who don't know, what is rendering?
What is rendering?
Yep.
That's actually a pretty complicated question, but what I'll translate that to is there's a difference between if you look at a web page and you right click, or I don't know, the Windows shortcut, but you view source, right? That is what you might call your raw HTML or your response HTML. It's something that's already been put together by a server. So there's already some rendering that happens, but a server is delivering it to the client, that is the browser. So Chrome is interpreting code and turning it into a visual web page for a user. So between the code that's there already, so a vanilla WordPress instance, for instance, doesn't necessarily need to be, it can be no JavaScript. You can just put all the content in your static HTML that's very simple and plain, and you can nest, your bulleted lists and your tables and all your traditional things that you'd expect to see there. And you can make it look pretty with CSS, and that turns into a web page. But when you're adding interactive features, that's typically handled with JavaScript. So are you using, say, a flyout menu? Are you having an accordion or an FAQ, that pops out so you can show a bunch of questions and not necessarily all the detailed answers underneath each question, so you can see the questions as a set. It's a user experience question. JavaScript can make for great user experiences that are much more interactive and visually interesting. But very frequently the technology, the code used to deploy that requires rendering. So it's a process, at least in terms of how we talk about it in SEO. What is the difference between what we're getting in the raw HTML, the response HTML, and what happens after that code is run? Once the JavaScript has completed running its job, which takes extra work, extra resource, extra tokens, that is what, upon rendering, that's what we can see. So Google renders a page in a very similar way to a browser, with sometimes slight differences, and it gives us a much more rich experience. So depending on your site and how you've written the code behind the scenes, all of your page content might not even be available until rendering. I've certainly seen instances.
That's what we're getting to. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And that means if an AI bot can't see your content on your page, then they don't know what the heck that page is about. They don't have that information. If you're not a big brand who has news written about them in other places, then they might not know much about you at all. So that can mean that ultimately you're not cited because they don't hardly know you exist, or they know you exist, but they don't know in what context, and they don't know what you're great at because they don't understand your topical authority because they literally can't see your content. So what shows up in the response HTML versus the rendered HTML is the difference here. And it's the goal behind why we created both of the extensions, whether it's Googlebot or whether it's an AI bot. The AI difference engine is, frankly, you can use RDE, rendering difference engine, to do everything you're doing almost in versus the AI difference engine. The other theory about why that's slightly different is that AI bots in theory see things and look at things and evaluate things that Google maybe doesn't care about. So for instance, Google has done work to improve their spam prevention measures to mean stuff like white text on a white page doesn't count as page copy. You don't get credit for that. That used to be a spammy SEO tactic in the aughts, and now it doesn't work anymore because Google will render and they'll, trigger the CSS and they'll trigger the JavaScript, and they know that they're not actually showing that content to those users. And so you don't get credit, and frankly, you might be penalized for that. But AI doesn't render, so they don't necessarily know that it's not showing on the page if they're not actually executing the CSS. So there might be stuff like white text on the page, or I don't know, maybe schema, and the text snippets in that. There's essentially stuff in your response HTML that Googlebot ignores purposefully for spam measures, or because it's just not very important to them and they don't care. That AI might see, like codes in the comments, comment codes, like, commented out HTML statements. So when developers make notes to each other and themselves about, hey, this is what this section is for, and this is what this is doing. Sometimes they put funny statements in there, or Easter eggs for people to discover. There's a bunch of different stuff that essentially could go in there that AI bots could see and believe to be true. That might be a joke amongst themselves internally that Google knows to ignore, but the AI bots don't. So AI Difference Engine attempts to look at both of those. What is in the response HTML, and what might be in there that you might not know you're putting on blast to AI engines.
Absolutely. And with there being so many different LLMs, so many different versions, so many different models, they're probabilistic and they're not deterministic. How are people to track their visibility via what's known as prompt tracking? We know there's prompt tracking, and then the other prominent way of tracking AI visibility is tracking the AI bot activity, via the log files. How do you kind of look at that? How are you measuring, how your clients are showing up in AI visibility, and also explaining that to the clients?
Yeah, there's a lot of pros and cons, and I think that this is ultimately an industry in its infancy. And prompt tracking is problematic in a lot of different ways. It is directionally helpful, but we ultimately don't have any true scaled knowledge, first party knowledge of what the heck people are prompting for. We don't know how people are constructing that. We probably know how we do it. We know maybe how our team does it if we have a shared company account, but that doesn't mean that's what your grandma is doing when she shows up and uses ChatGPT. And that's not necessarily how, your customer is using. So whether or not we trust that, sometimes I take it with a grain of salt, and sometimes I would call it directionally accurate. I'm just trying to understand topically, am I showing up, or the brands that I'm working with showing up for those categories of interest that we want them to be showing up for? So when I talk about measurement for LLMs as a whole, I split it into 3 phases. The first is really that log file data analysis that you spoke to. So it's understanding what bots are hitting what pages at what frequency, or what assets, right? There was a time, I think in February, where I'm reviewing my own logs for AI bots on my site, and then all of a sudden my sitemap XML file started getting hit pretty significantly by at least 2 different LLMs. But prior they weren't. So that was sort of an important thing that those logs showed me, that maybe there's other mechanisms for, say, URL discovery that they're starting to work with that are outside of, say, internal linking, which maybe was the only way they could discover that prior. So that's one potential learning from logs, is what tools are they using? How are they evolving over time? And also just what bots hits to what pages, and are they meaningful? Also according to type, because there's a different AI bot that updates the training model versus a different bot that's doing the live fetching, when it's not when maybe there's live information or a news story that's breaking that they need to get new information from. They'll do both, and you might be cited on different pages for different reasons. So I want to understand all of that, and I potentially want to correlate that if there is a connection to downstream activities. So that's phase 1. What are bots doing on our site? Then the second phase is the visibility tracking. That's share of voice, that's citation, that's brand mentions, that's kind of the things the Profounds of the world and the ARC AI from SEO Clarity, those kinds of tools are seeking to measure.
What the stakeholders want to see. Are we showing up?
This is all, when people talk about LLM measurement, they're almost always only talking about the phase 2. Are we cited or are we not? And that's also interesting, because when you sign up for AI tracking, it means they are using new prompts to measure that, and therefore you are driving up your own metrics of how often this thing is searched, and as are your competitors who are doing that. So it's an interesting, dirty data problem. I don't know how we solve that, but hopefully that will be solved one day. But that's that middle piece that they care about. And then the third phase, much like SEO, is okay, but also what traffic did it drive? Can we tell if it's not being driven directly by a referral? Can we see how much our direct traffic is going up, and how much do we think is attributable to AI search efforts versus advertising versus search? Where are we investing in what channels? Because all marketing channels ultimately influence your big picture brand searches and direct hits. So we can try and understand that information, as well as obviously track traffic that's directly trackable, as well as the business value being driven, which is ultimately, I think, what businesses care about. Even though people are focused on the AI visibility, do I have mentions? Is my brand cited? And then they care about traffic, but I care about revenue. I care about leads. I care about driving business value from that. So those are kind of the three phases and how we want to measure leading and lagging indicators.
Okay, I'm sure that's a lot to explain to the stakeholders, especially those that don't speak the language. Let me ask you this. Grey Dot recently published an investigation where an AI system returned incorrect data. So how can brands measure not only if they show up, but if the data is accurate or not? Or should they even be measuring that?
I'd say it's a key problem I work on with clients, frankly. So I'm often working on enterprise accounts, not always, but it is kind of a key part of our offering. And so if you're the brand that already has all the mentions and all the citations and you're not really worried about that, you're worried about more so, does an LLM understand what brand is and what it does? Is it nuancedly accurate or inaccurate? Is it citing data about me and for me and on my behalf that's inaccurate and leading people and customers to bad conclusions? So we can audit that through a variety of means, including directly querying and seeing, hey, what do you know about this? And seeing what the various tools, systems, models will say about it. And then starting to dig deeper into why. Is that because you have a rendering issue and the bots can't actually see that content and they don't know? So maybe it's a technical problem on your own site that they can't find the correct information at the source. So sometimes we fix it there. And then sometimes it's incorrect information somewhere else. Maybe it's an outdated Facebook profile or LinkedIn page. There's various sources for where that material might come from, right? But if I can reverse engineer, okay, where are you seeing that? ChatGPT, then you can start to go correct it in the various places. Or it might be something you don't own, but maybe you can, I don't know, send a cease and desist. Or you can work with the newspaper that published an article to say, hey, this is actually not accurate and this is why, and this is the data I have to prove it. So perhaps you'd print a retraction. But it's definitely a real problem that can be on either side of sometimes it's a technical access issue, and sometimes it's in real life, out in the world, bad data issue to go track down and correct.
Or maybe the LLM is just plain making stuff up, hallucinating.
That too. But it generally hallucinates to be faster, right? Or because it's seeing patterns in the industry. So another common problem we're looking to solve is, how often are they hallucinating URLs on your site? Is that more or less than we see on average? Which I think the number that I've heard quoted is about 2% of URLs for a given brand might be hallucinated versus accurate. So why do they hallucinate? So I've seen one enterprise case where it seems like this particular brand has a slightly different URL path, like how they structure their folders and what order they put them in, than some of their other competitors. So maybe the LLMs are borrowing the URL patterns from other sites and assuming that we have that on our site. Right. So why is that hallucination happening? Are they hallucinating because they don't know? Because you have a rendering issue on your site. You can fix that. You can't fix all of it, but I think through a great technical implementation, you can get to a place where the rate of hallucination is perhaps reduced because you're giving them correct data. And the louder you can be about shouting about the correct data, the more you can potentially get in front of incorrect data that might be elsewhere.
Absolutely. OKF was recently published by Google Cloud. Can you explain a little bit about what that is? And is it important? Should it be important to brands, or is it hype?
I think it's too early to say if it's hype or not. Google has put their backing behind lots of different standards and proposals and things for the web. They've put out products that have worked and not worked, right? But an OKF is essentially, it's built for an agentic world, and agentic bots. So when you want a user to be able to deploy a bot or army of bots on their behalf, to be able to go take action on their behalf, how do they successfully use that bot to interact with a website, an API, your software tooling in general? So OKFs are the technical implementation that Google is proposing, putting forward to help bots be able to accomplish that successfully. So if you want someone to be able to check out on your site, for instance, if you're e-commerce, or if you want users to be able to apply for a job on your site, are kind of the two most common use cases that we talk about in an agentic world. How do you enable them to do that? You can help them using a system and following the technical specifications put forth by an OKF. They only put that up 3 years ago at the time of this filming? 3 weeks ago. Sorry. That would be a big difference there. So will it be meaningful? It depends on how many people look to deploy it and how successful it is. There are plenty of competing standards out there of how to make things available for bots. So I think it's just too early. I would say I don't have any clients moving forward right now on OKFs. There's so many other foundational work and systems. And I'd say even the cutting edge brands are mostly focused right now on defining what the heck could agents do and what do we do about it? And do we want to be in a defensive stance? Do we want to go after those growth opportunities versus am I actually deploying the how? And all the, there's a ton of competing standards out there with various levels of adoption. So which one are you going to deploy? That also changes based on how cutting edge are you as a brand? Are you the kind of brand that needs a case study and 7 case studies to prove that you should go forward and implement this SEO change? Or are you the kind of brand that's willing to send engineering efforts ultimately? Because this is a very engineering development heavy body of work on your site and across your software to make this work. You have to be willing to maybe deploy some things that might not pay off in the future if this is not a winning endeavor. What if WebMCP is the path forward? What if Cloudflare's they're recommending creating skills in the well-known folder? There's a lot of different ways to make things in theory better for agents. So who will win the standards war? I don't know. But that's the big
And that segues into my question about LLM.txt. We know it's important for developers. Does it matter at all for search, agentic search, AI search, SEO?
I'd say the jury is a little bit still out on that one too. It was originally proposed as a complement to the robots.txt to give instructions, and the original use case was in theory around AI search. Google came out pretty strongly against it, and no LLM has come out in support of this proposed standard for AI search reasons. More recently, some of Google's teams have started to propose using the LLMs.txt for the use case of agentic bots. So can we use this file to tell bots what actions they can take on your site and how to do so successfully and how to find the resources to accomplish those tasks? So is it useful for geo or AI search? So far as we know, no, because no one has said yes. And some of those people that are in charge of those companies have actively said no. But for the agentic use case, that's a strong maybe. And so what we're seeing is people that did deploy LLMs.txt early on as a way to experiment for AI search are now adapting and changing the contents of that file to meet potentially a new use case for agentic bots instead.
Interesting. And so when a brand is cited inside these AI answers, ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, etc., a lot of times they don't actually get a click through to their website, as you know. So how are you measuring that? And how important is it to measure how often people are showing up? Are you using prompt tracking?
So we're a small agency and often we're working in enterprise. So my clients own the prompt tracking engines, and then we will be given access into their tools and help them architect what sort of reporting do they want, what sort of metrics, and what are we tracking and why, essentially. So yes, we're prompt tracking, but we're doing it under their guidance based on their goals, frankly, and within their infrastructure.
Okay. So a SaaS company, I'm gonna shoot you a hypothetical here, a situation. A SaaS company comes to Greydat and essentially just asks you, make us get more clients in ChatGPT. Get us more clients in ChatGPT. What is the first thing Greydat does, and how are we going to get to the goal that the client wants to achieve?
So I would actually push back and clarify that we don't offer off-the-shelf geo optimization services. We are a small firm and we focus specifically on the strategy and the technical piece. So the part of the geo AI search agentic puzzle that we own is focused on those parts. And so a SaaS company that comes to me, I'm going to be talking to them about what infrastructure they have and if their situation is a good fit for our skill set, frankly. Do you have an embedded content team? Do they want and need technical advice? What is their technical stack? Do we think that that's going to be a barrier to their success in geo? So I can certainly talk to them about what is your SEO foundation, because as we talked about previously, AI search geo is based on the baseline, the foundation that is SEO. So some of it's helping them figure out and identify where are their gaps. Do they already have the teams in place to deploy that? And am I a good fit to complement those teams? Because we absolutely work with the teams in terms of strategy. So what sorts of content changes are people testing? What are we seeing working in the marketplace? We consult on that. We don't execute on that. So that's why I don't sell the services per se, but we help companies accomplish the big picture, because I don't do affiliate marketing. I don't do brand. I don't do PR. I do what I do well. And I work with other teams and people that do what they do well and help them figure out where do we meet in the middle to get to business success. So my short answer is I sort of don't. And when I do, I'm helping them identify what is the gap. How do we fill the gap? Who is right to fill that gap? So I might do, say, a project to identify the ecosystem and then say, okay, well, we have all the right people. They have the right teams to deploy, or they don't. And what are their gaps? Should they go out and do digital PR? Because then they can work with a vendor that specializes in that to do that most effectively.
Okay, and between all of these, schema experiments, LLM tracking tools, new search features, all of these different emerging, AEO and GEO aspects, how do we determine what's important for brands versus what's shiny objects?
It's a good question, and frankly, it's an exhausting question. I think we as an industry are pretty exhausted about all the news and all the changes about all of this because it's evolving very, very quickly. And I think that that means different things for different brands in different stages. So for a smaller brand that is not necessarily the industry leader for whatever their service line is, some of it's, hey, let's just get our foundation together. That's the right thing to focus on for them at that time. It can be maybe thinking through the agentic tasks. It can be making sure that their topical authority is in a good place. I think it comes down to bottom line and where that can impact you. And that can be based on what your business is and where you are. I think for enterprise brands, there can be much more actionable they're in a position essentially to take advantage of their existing brand and their existing brand citations to potentially influence, and they can also afford to play the long game. So even if and when spammy tactics are winning in the short term in AI, they can be making the right long-term decisions that mean that they will win when AI services inevitably overcome some of these basic spam issues that they're experiencing right now. So they're in a great position to be able to be much more tactical with this work. They could be focused on, the technical piece of their site and whether or not they're sharing the correct information. Is their brand aligned? Are they rendering properly? Versus a smaller brand, I think, frankly, has a harder time. They can be playing in the shorter term pool of options if that's something that they're comfortable with. But I think if I'm being honest, I think it's a challenge for smaller brands in the AI ecosystem. If the AI is only citing the top 3 brands, how small does it need to get for that to be you? How much are we segmenting out? And is there a path for you to win in the short and the long term? And I don't think that's always the case. So for a lot of them, it's you work on the foundations, and as that channel evolves and hopefully drives more business value that we can measure and track later, you'll be in a better position to take advantage of it at that time. So I don't know that everyone needs to focus on that squirrel, that shiny object.
Gotcha. And so looking ahead for the next 24 months, what do you think business owners and brands will wish they had started doing today, 24 months from now?
Excellent questions. For AI discovery. So I think what brands, especially all brands, but especially enterprise brands, should be focused on right now is defining what they think agents are going to be doing and how that will impact their brand. And how do they protect their brand, protect their infrastructure, protect their data, and potentially how do they take advantage of potential revenue opportunities? And how do they take advantage of strategic opportunities? Because let's not pretend that being agentic ready is just about actual direct revenue. It's also about the story that a brand can tell publicly and in the news, and how they can influence stakeholders about being cutting edge and being prepared for the future. So I think brands should be exploring, what are agents doing? What can they do today? What will they be doing in the future? Protecting their brands and taking active action to prevent spammy, malicious activities, as well as enabling the actions that they decide they want users to be able to take autonomously with agents.
Okay, and you guys run experiments. What is one experiment that you think every brand should run now to improve their visibility in AI search?
I don't know that there is any one experiment. And frankly, I don't know that all brands need to experiment. When we run experiments as a community, I think it's about trying to help us learn as a community. So one, experiment that we have attempted to run, for example, is how much does an AI bot care about link formatting, for instance. So Googlebot cares a lot about structuring your URLs and your links as hrefs. But there are other linking mechanisms that work for other use cases, especially apps. So when JavaScript stacks and SPAs and, more modern technology comes along, app behavior, there's other ways to link that work for a user, like onClicks, like router link, for instance. These are mechanisms, again, that work for users, but does Googlebot know to follow this link type? And do they believe it, and do they pass link equity the way that they would through an href? For Googlebot, that answer is a pretty clear no. They say so explicitly in their documentation. For AI bots, that's a question I have, right? Like, if you're using a JavaScript stack and you have onClicks, do we think that AI bots are actually discovering your URLs? So pulling back from your question, I don't know that, again, that every brand needs to run experiments so much as we should be listening to what the experiments are that are out in the community, defining ones that might be meaningful, specific experiments for them to learn from. Maybe they should be focused on those, hearing about the other experiments and trying to learn from them. And frankly, like asking good questions about those experiments, because there are a lot of experiment results out in the wild right now in the geo world, and a lot of them aren't very good and don't actually answer the question that they think that they're answering. So going back to your shiny object, like sometimes we're chasing a thing that's not real because we didn't know how to ask the question. So ask the question, define what you want to learn, run that experiment, or work with someone that can help you do that, or listen to the experiments that actually provide meaning to you and your bottom line.
Can you tell the people where to find you?
I'm Tory Gray. You can Google me. You can also look up thegray.company. You can find us at thegray.company instead of a .com.
Absolutely. And I'll put Tory's information in the description box under this video. Tory, it was a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
It was lovely. Thanks so much for your time today, Caleb. It's been a blast.